we're now at September, which means you're about to get a whole bunch of verses for the next couple of months, among other things. And I wanted to start with this because I honestly thought this was a video I was never going to actually do. Because, obviously, since 2009, if you were there, this was a very popular thing to notice was, oh, there's Paul Blart and there's Observe and Report. They came out the same year, a few months, I think Paul Blart was January, and then I think it was April 10th was Observe and Report. And I'll mention how I remember that. But this idea was, oh, they're mall cop movies, but they're so, one's basically a kid's movie and one is anything but. And so, fast forward, and we're doing this versus thing, and it's starting to come up a lot. Owen mentions it a lot, and other people mention it a lot, comments mention it from time to time, and I just avoided it like the plague, because it was like, yeah, I get it, two completely different mall cop comedies came out within like 4 months of each other. Okay, but like, how do you even go about comparing them? Because, yes, they have that in common. Yes, it is very coincidental and weird, but other than that, other than the characters' titles, the movies are on other planets. Like, how do you possibly... Like, what do I even say? How do I do this? So, I watched them back for the sake of doing this, and I was very shocked to find that maybe they're not as different as I remembered. Not only is it, the two main characters and they share the same job title, but I feel like, weirdly enough, they might have more in common than one might initially realize. And also, I feel like, we'll get to this probably closer to the end, but I feel like they both also struggle as being comedies for two completely different reasons. So they have more in common than I remembered. So I feel like the only way to do this, usually it's like, sometimes we'll just talk about one, then we'll talk about the other, sometimes it's back and forth. I honestly don't know how to go into this. I just decided I'm just going to turn the camera on and we're going to see what happens. So I feel like that's the only possible way to do this. So, and obviously another thing they have in common is it was also very popular to notice that both of them sort of made mall cop comedies from other more serious movies, where you could say Paul Blart is the mall cop comedy version of Die Hard, and Observe and Report is the mall cop comedy version of Taxi Driver. So, once again, what you're also basically asking for is to compare Die Hard and Taxi Driver. How does one do that? I have no idea. So, let's go into what I'm talking about, actually. The first thing is that how these characters may have more in common than just the fact that they're mall security guards. So, I do think there is a mental health thing at play here for both characters, and it's, you look at Observe and Report and you're like, oh yeah, obviously. And he even says bipolar at some point, almost in like passing, and I think the movie only mentions it once. And it's clear that Ronnie Barnard has a lot of problems. And just general psychopathy is probably in there too, but I'm not a doctor. But Paul Blart as well, I feel like because the thing is like, Ronnie Barnard has a lot of problems, especially mental health issues, but the fact that they barely go acknowledged at all, and that people just kind of let him just go about his whatever the hell he does, is the joke of the movie. Like, it's the number one joke of the movie that is consistent through the whole thing. Like, that's the idea. Paul Blart decides to kind of jump over a lot of things about this character, like the fact that when we first see him, after we see his little training montage, and then he's sitting at the dinner table with his mother and his daughter, we learn that he has been abandoned by his wife and left with his only child. He's been rejected from his dream job. He's clearly depressed. He has these overeating issues that come from the depression, where he's, putting peanut butter on something and saying, go away pain, peanut butter covers the cracks in the heart or something like that. And all this movie wants us to do at this is laugh and say, haha, look at the fat fuck. I'm not saying I root for Paul Blart through this movie, but I feel like somebody needs to be checking up on him and looking out for him, because he's clearly not in a good place. But unlike that being the joke of the movie, like Observe and Report does, and the reason I think this is especially weird is because the movie basically calls it out in other ways, but not directly. Where it's like, well, first of all, even kind of going off that for a second, there's the scene when they're making him the dating profile, and the video they're going to use is him fucking around on his Segway. So, when the daughter says she's going to use this, Paul's response is, don't you think it's a little too, hey, look at me? And I swear the movie says that with no self-awareness. It might sound like the movie's being more clever than it lets on, but I don't think there's any self-awareness in that whatsoever, because this is not that kind of movie. So yeah, that's basically what Kevin James' whole performance is in this movie, is what he's criticizing in this little segue video. And I feel like and coming back to the other problem, I feel like they ask questions directly to the audience. Once again, with hardly any awareness whatsoever. There is the fake 9/11 guy, whose name I can't remember because he probably just needs to be known as that for the rest of his life anyway. But the guy that it may or may not be Jamie Mays' boyfriend throughout this, the guy that's bullying him, one of the guys that's bullying him, is like calls him fat at some point, and he just laughs it off because he's used to that, and it's like, oh, if you can't laugh at yourself, then what are you gonna do? But it covers the depression. And the guy, like, just stops dead and says, I just called you fat, why are you laughing? And it's like, I wonder if it registered with any audience members whatsoever, like, oh, yeah, why am I? Because that's what we're supposed to do through the whole movie, is just laugh at the fat guy for being fat and inept. So, I don't know. And maybe, yeah, you could say, oh man, you're taking Paul Blart way too seriously. Well, I'm tasked with comparing him to Ronnie Barnhart, so I gotta work with what I have. And when we're talking about Ronnie Barnhart, we're clearly talking about people who need help. So that's the direction I'm taking this. But to go on, for another reason that is overlooked and is meant to be charming and funny, that's also very interesting, we're comparing these movies, is that Jayma Mays, as I just mentioned, is Paul Blart's love interest. She works at like a kiosk or something, and so he kind of goes by in a Segway and he sees her, and it's like when you see somebody from a distance that you see like multiple times if you happen to be in the same area a lot, and it's like, and you just see that person, and that person might register, but then you just kind of go about the rest of your day. She's not only does she stick in Paul Blart's mind completely, but he starts to survey her on the mall's security cameras because he's that stuck on this. And I look at that and I think, that's not a charming comedy move. That's a Ronnie Barnhart move. But even Ronnie Barnhart never sinks to that, at least that I can remember. He sinks to some lows, let's be clear. Let's be very, very clear, the lows that he sinks to. And there's a line towards the beginning of Observe and Report where he's like talking to Anna Faris, and he says something like, he's talking about like, women being assaulted, and he's like, putting something in them that they don't want in them. And it's like how weird that foreshadowing is. Yeah, so he's stalking her. Paul Blart is stalking Jayma Mays on the security cameras in the mall. And it's like, we never learn what would she think if she knew that. There's a scene that I really like to maybe take one way when it's obviously supposed to be another thing, when he decides that he's going to take her on a Segway ride through the mall and eventually take her to her car. And he's saying, I can do this, it's fine. And she says, I feel like this will get you fired. Will this get you fired? And he's like, yeah, this could get me fired. And she's like, well, okay, then let's do it. And it's like now when you hear it in that context, it almost sounds like, oh, you're the guy that clocks me every time he walks by the kiosk. So if I can get you fired and out of this mall and away from me, let's do this thing. Let's see if we can get you fired. Obviously, what it appears to be is more of a, you mean you're willing to risk your job to show me a good time? Okay. Charming, and then they start to like each other. I get it. But the first one makes a lot more sense to me, but she never found out about the security camera thing. So if she did, I feel like we'd get the same scene. We would just never see him in that mall again. So, but, you know, here's the thing, though, is I will give the movie credit for something, and that is, technically, I guess it's last hour, but we'll get into the specifics. But what I mean by that is, when you look at Observe and Report, I guess one of Observe and Report's problems is that they put Ronnie in a lot of situations that feel like they could be sort of a cohesive thing, but it's not. The movie's just kind of generally disoriented and disjointed. But, and maybe that's intentional, but here, when you look at what Paul Blart's life is, it's very clear that you cannot make this a whole movie. And it's like, so you set up the character, so the movie does the best thing that it could have possibly done, and that's put this character, that's very clearly in a comedy, in what is otherwise a very serious situation, this hostage situation in the mall, where it essentially turns into Die Hard, I guess. And it's, the movie's already short, but I do find it also interesting that there's so much of that. But it's like they have so little to work with. Not only does it feel like, you know, just a movie about Paul Blart would be so paper thin and you probably really couldn't even do it. But the actual main portion of the movie, this whole hostage situation, is still less than an hour of the movie. Still less than an hour of the runtime. And that includes credits. With the credits that are long enough to have other scenes in them. So... there's that also, but I guess that's one thing it has going for it, is that it did give him a sort of cohesive thing to do in this movie, so that the movie was able to do something and kind of come to a point. Which once again, it depends on what exactly you want to credit Observe and Report for, in regards to what exactly it is, as far as being along those lines. But it's the characters that we meet as we go through this. We've got Keira O'Donnell here, who's, I guess he's doing what he can in this villain role, but it is more or less like you could consider it a family movie, and it has, you know, jokes here and there that would be, you know, strictly for adults, and it is, you know, like, it has the Happy Madison logo and stuff like that. But even so, with all of that said, I feel like when you look at when it's being serious, like Keira O'Donnell's villain, for instance, and obviously Paul Blart being our hero, it feels much more like a kid's movie than like a whole family movie. I know that that's a fine line, but I imagine you get what I mean. So, that being said, it is very interesting that we have one character that kind of negates this. Just one character with, like, 2 throwaway jokes. And it's like, it goes from, this feels like a kid's movie, to, wait, this movie's only PG? And you slipped that in? This one character whose job it is to obsess over another character. And this character, the guy that's on the phone, that has, you know, the weird obsession, he has, like, the whole shrine to her, he has the tracking in her phone that he follows. This guy is like a straight out stalker, and the movie does not hide this. It's played as a joke. And the thing here that's weird is, number one, I remember the first time I saw the movie in January 2009, and there were a lot of kids. It was so packed. This movie was fucking huge if you weren't there. And there were kids everywhere, packed with kids. And there's the line where he thinks that Paul Blart is a boyfriend, or a threat with this girl, and he says, "I'll bet you're sweating over her right now." You see, I guess to us that sounds mild, but it's like, think about that line in what is essentially a kid's movie. That's a lot. And it's shown that, and in another throwaway line, this guy apparently has a foot fetish. Once again, not that there's anything terribly wrong with that, just, you know, kids movie. It seems very out of left field. But I think the thing that really comes into play here, though, the thing that really makes this guy super creepy in a way that it feels like the movie's embracing it, is that this guy, because of his stalking tactic with the tracking her phone, it basically saves the day. So that saves the day. Paul Blart ends up with Jayma Mays. They get married during the end credits. So, looking at where they ended up and how this guy saved the day, this movie not once, but twice says that stalking is the answer. Stalking is the solution. Now, I'm not saying all this was intentional. It's just trying to be a comedy. And I probably shouldn't be taking it so seriously. Because there's stupid shit in here throughout that's just like, this is jump the shark. This is as stupid as it could possibly be. Like the scene where he jumps the gap with his Segway. But it's trying to be a comedy. So I would be a hypocrite to say that because I have no problems with the gap jump in Speed. Which is equally ridiculous, to be honest. But because I say Speed's just that kind of movie. That's why I think it's okay. The gap jump is okay in Speed. You could say it's a stupid-ass comedy, so it's... I'd be a hypocrite if I said anything else about that. But, that's the thing, though, is that, well, I'm going to leave this at this, and then I want to come back to Paul Blart. We're going to go to Observe and Report, because this is where we're kind of starting to come together a little bit for what I think both of these movies have a similar problem, just in totally different ways. But, yes, let's talk about Observe and Report, which is a pretty insane movie. Insane concept, insane characters, insane everything. They went out on it. Jody Hill is the writer and director, and he's, trying to just not hold back here. And Observe and Report is definitely one of those movies that you will remember because of this. Here's the thing. Think about this for a second. The reason I remember so vividly the date that Observe and Report came out, April 10th, 2009, was because that day is basically forever solidified in my head. Number one, Observe and Report came out the same day as the Hannah Montana movie. And I remember this because I saw the Hannah Montana movie right before I saw Observe and Report. There was like 10 minutes between showtimes, between when Hannah Montana ended and when Observe and Report started. They were just one right after the other. The other thing, I feel like I remember this so clearly, is that by the time I saw Observe and Report, I can't remember why this was the case, but I do remember 2009 was a rough year. I had been awake for like 30 straight hours. I had not slept the night before. I had been awake for about 30 straight hours when Observe and Report started. So I'm sitting in a theater watching a movie like Observe and Report, having been awake for 30 hours, and you would think, oh, your mind must have been really tired, so that whole experience must be so hazy. No. I remember it like it was fucking yesterday. Because you just remember the first time you see Observe and Report, let alone when your brain has its guard down. It's all in there. My first reactions to everything are still in here 13 years later. So, as it starts, obviously with, Paul Blart, it's Black Friday, and we get, a lot of malls, and it's, it looks like malls and Jingle All the Way and stuff like that. They're all crowded and all that. The opening scene of Krampus comes to mind. Just packed malls are a thing, but when you look at the opening credits of Observe and Report, it's actually this really nice, nostalgic opening that, like, really embraces the setting of the mall. Like, it's first of all, it's weird to see, like, a mall so alive. It feels like this grand place. Like, if malls haven't felt this grand since, like, the opening of Mallrats or something. And it's, like, you see the different wide variety of stores. Like, not every single thing is a clothing store. And it's almost like feels like this ode to malls in general. And it's actually kind of nice for a movie that's so psychotic. But then we're introduced to, I talked about with Paul Blart about how the best thing they did was give him a cohesive storyline to get stuck in. Give him an objective. So, Ronnie Barnard has a few objectives throughout this movie. And the first one we get right away. And that is the problem of the flasher. The guy that's running around in just a coat, flashing people outside the mall. And dude, I gotta say, what's really interesting about this movie is some of the techniques that they use, like the fact that this whole scene where the flasher's introduced is all done in one take, as the camera follows him around the parking lot from behind. We don't see his face until the end, and it's this whole. It feels like this whole dramatic thing. It feels like this one take feels like it's shot like an action movie would be. Like it's shot like a chase scene would be shot or something in a movie that's like the foot chase in Baby Driver, like that kind of thing almost. It feels like the way that it's shot, just not as frenetic. And right away you think, okay, this is taking a very interesting approach to its subject matter, because obviously the joke is that it's obviously going the distance as far as like raunchy movies go, but at the same time it's gonna be a unique experience with what it's combining to make this a full picture. Where, like I said, elements of Taxi Driver, the way things are shot, and just the content itself. On top of the fact that we have a main character like Ronnie Barnard at the center of this. And thinking about it as a comedy, because I had said that Paul Blart has a very specific style of comedy where it's like, it feels like a kid's movie inside of a... Like, it's very much a PG movie inside of what would be a PG-13 movie. So, here, we have what's essentially this sort of Apatow era thing, where everything feels kind of improv, everything feels kind of on the fly. Constant profanity, all that stuff. Very, very... the stuff that we know Seth Rogen for. And so, we have this scene that's plays out in a very interesting fashion when you think about that style of comedy, because even though it feels like that style, the other thing that kind of goes into that sort of Apatow brand that was really big at this time, and most comedies felt like, especially if they had Seth Rogen in them, it sort of like carried over, was the idea of doing like 20 takes with 20 different lines, and then just putting them all in the movie. Instead of like choosing the best one and making it concise. That was the thing. So, this movie is actually quite concise. It doesn't even break an hour and a half. It is shorter than Paul Blart, weirdly enough. And the editing is very, very quick for a lot of it, where it's like when he's outside with the reporter right after the flasher has struck again at the very beginning, and he doesn't realize that he's live, so he's saying, like, oh, you fucked up my title, let's do it again. And then he does the thing where he says, well, since you fucked up my title, I'm going to fuck up your title. Hey, I'm standing here with this doctor. And the scene cuts right there, very abruptly. And it's like, you feel like there were like more jokes there, more of a scene there, and it just cuts right off. Like, it feels like we did not see the whole scene. That's how quick it is. Which is the polar opposite of what I was talking about with Apatow syndrome, where it was like 20 takes in one and it makes the movie over 2 fucking hours. So, I do like that to an extent. And I don't want to seem like I'm like Dan if you do, Dan if you don't about this, but I mean, what does make that a problem with Observe and Report is that even though the movie's less than an hour and a half, Observe and Report has really bad pacing issues because of this too, where it feels like a lot of stuff happens. It feels like we get a lot of stuff, a lot of plot threads, a lot of characters, a lot of little comedic bits, comedic lines, whatever. And after it feels like we've gotten an avalanche of stuff, the movie's only been on for like 10 or 15 minutes. And stuff like that is probably going to make that happen. But then, on the other side, you can see where it's also better to not go down that route where you drag scenes out, because while we do have scenes like that cut off really early, we have scenes like the first scene with Aziz Ansari. Aziz, who is very funny in this, but you see what sucks about that style of comedy when you look at the fuck you scene. Where it's like, and you can do it well. There's the scene in This Is the End where James Franco and Danny McBride are talking about jerking off on each other. And it goes on and on and on, but the longer it goes on, the funnier it is. I think that's what they're trying to do with the fuck you scene here with Aziz, where it just feels like it's an eternity. An eternity of them saying fuck you back and forth in various different ways. And it runs out of gas before they cut. And so it's like, so you could tell where there were times where they were trying to be concise, but when they were trying to be concise, it doesn't quite work out because it fucks up the pacing. And when they're trying to drag a joke out, they're maybe picking the wrong joke. Or the scene isn't funny enough or strong enough to warrant being stretched out over and over and over again. Another one that comes to mind that it kind of feels like it's supposed to be like is the scene in Bad Santa where Bernie Mac keeps saying half, where it's funnier every time he says it in a different way. It just doesn't quite get there, and that will not be the last time I reference Bad Santa when talking about this movie, so we'll get to that too. Um, so talking about the supporting characters like we talked about here, another one I overlooked in Paul Blart was Bobby Cannavale, who is the SWAT guy who says like he set him on fire at the Pancake Festival and stuff like that. And he's the guy that's I do like the joke where the other cop is trying to give like Paul lessons and has like a book of like clever comebacks he can use. That's kind of funny. But he's just there to kind of be another antagonistic bully character with a twist to him at the end that doesn't really matter. Which is so Cannavale in Paul Blart is basically the Ray Liotta in Observe and Report. But here's the thing: is where Cannavale is like just another kind of throwaway bully character because there's so many of those characters in Paul Blart anyway. That there's only so much. Well, Cannavale is amazing in general, obviously, but there's only so much he can do with this shit material. However, Liotta, on the other hand, it can do so much with so little. And it's worth noting, not only did we obviously lose Ray Liotta recently, but Ben Best is here also in a lot of the same scenes, and we also lost him recently too, which sucks. But talking about the back and forth here that Liotta has with Seth Rogen. And I love that Seth Rogen had nothing but nice things to say about him when everybody was putting their tributes out, especially when you see their relationship here. So, what Liotta does here that's so beautiful is basically what Liotta did best, where you could sort of see just this constant annoyance that was building to a rage, and it's just it's just a matter of when the rage is going to come out. So this is the perfect kind of character to put with Ronnie Barnhart, especially when Ronnie Barnhart is somebody that is has such a low title, whereas Harrison is an actual detective. And we've seen how these two work and how this is clearly going to clash. And so it's maybe only 20 minutes. Maybe 20 minutes into the movie when Harrison has already snapped. And it's like, and you love the fact, what's great about that is usually it's like, Ray Liotta plays characters with a bad temper. But here it's like, when Harrison snaps 20 minutes into the movie, it says so much more about Ronnie than it does about Harrison. And watching that, because there's also a really great bit here where it's one shot, and this is another great sort of what Liotta can do kind of all at once thing, where it's never one note with Liotta. So it's one shot where we're inside his car and we're watching him come out of the police station, and he's laughing and he's joking around with the other cops, and he's still laughing to himself when he comes to the car, and then he gets in, and then Ronnie's in the back seat, and he's in the car, and Harrison snaps again, and it's like to watch in this one unbroken take where Liotta was laughing and joking around, then laughing back to the car, and then just right into, oh, what the fuck are you doing here? And there's no cuts. It's all one shot. And I really love that. The way they didn't waste Liotta with this part. It wasn't like, oh, do the thing that you can do well. They really gave him the they gave him the stage to just really show off how he can do sort of both things and do it like at the drop of a hat. And what also is great about what Liotta brings to the table here, that's probably one of the single best moments of the movie, is in one-line delivery. Where it's at the very end, he's caught the flasher, he's brought into the police station, and just this perfect delivery, Liotta says, "Congratulations, Ronnie, you caught a pervert." And it's so sarcastic, it is so this perfectly condescending way that it sums up the whole absurdity of the entire movie in one-line delivery. Because that's the stuff that Liotta could do. So, we have that character. We also have, Anna Faris doing the sort of, that character to where it's like, okay, here's the thing about her, is that the way she plays this character is, it could have been this really sort of stereotypical way, But it's almost like I feel really weird saying this because it makes sense in my head what I'm about to say, and I'm not sure if it's going to make sense once it's out. It it's almost reminds me of Madeline Kahn in a way that she could take a character that's clearly just a type, but she makes it like this whole other level of funny by playing into the type as much as possible, like just really just laying into it as much as she can, and turning this sort of obvious character type into this such an over-the-top caricature of this type that it's now hilarious. And she's able to do that. And we also have Celia Weston here, who has a very extensive body of work. And I have to say, I don't know why this is, but this is one of those cases where, you know, when you see an actor or actress, and usually immediately, like, one movie will come to mind. For some reason, with Celia Weston, it's this movie. Everything she's been in, all the different parts that she's played, every time I see Celia Weston, the first thing I think of is the scenes in this. And it's and just some of her deliveries are just perfect also. And it's like it's sort of like the stuff that Sandy Martin does really well, only a little more deadpan and warmth. Maybe not as deadpan, but more warmth. And so another person here that I always keep forgetting is in this is Jesse Plemons, back before he really broke out. Because I would say his breakout was Breaking Bad, and Breaking Bad was only 1 year in when this came out. So what's really interesting about that, though, is that it does feel like this character is just a slightly more sane version of his character in Game Night. Like I almost want to believe that this and Game Night are in the same universe, and this guy was around Ronnie Barnhart so long that he became who he is in Game Night eventually. And so that's always great to see when you see people in like the early stages of their career. But speaking of that, another person that plays a pretty major part in this is Michael Pena, who feels like he's mainly known for comedic roles now. At least that's the way it feels like. And I feel like, unless I'm mistaken, I want to say this was the start of... Like, I want to say Michael Pena playing a part like this was really unexpected and out of nowhere casting at the time. Like, it seems totally obvious now, but then, like, he'd go on to do, like, 30 Minutes or Less, and the Ant-Man movies where he plays really comedic characters. And I feel like that's just kind of his forte now. Leaving behind, like, the super, super dramatic roles of Crash and stuff like that. And I kind of feel like, unless I'm mistaken, this was, like, the starting off point of Michael Pena being seen as, like, a almost strictly comedic sidekick kind of character. Because you think, Crash was only, 4 years before this? And now you're looking at him in the scene where everything is sort of getting out of control. He's the one that, like Ronnie's already a character on the edge, and Dennis is a character that's taking him down an even worse path, it seems. Like Ronnie's only going to get worse the more he's around this guy. Like, that's how fucked up the Dennis character is. So we obviously we get to that point where Ronnie's starting to get crazier as he goes off his meds proudly. He does the whole sort of Judgment Day scene where he's being interviewed and like everything starts to come out. And this person interviewing him is horrified. And see, this is where the point where it's like, I love that the characters kind of seem to brush it to the side, but the movie doesn't brush it to the side, that there's something clearly wrong here, and the way they're able to use that as the joke. But then, as he goes further down the path, and he talks about, this is the other Bad Santa comparison, was the moment where it's kind of funny in Bad Santa when he talks to Tony Cox about how he beat the shit out of those kids, and he said, it made me feel good, it made me feel like I had a purpose, beating the shit out of those kids. And that's essentially what Ronnie Barnhart says about his fucked up nature, was the more fucked up things that he does, the more he kind of delves into the violence that is in his mind, he feels like he's serving his purpose. But it has like this sort of bizarre, uneasy feel to it, while you're also kind of laughing at it because it's going down that path despite being a comedy. But then we have the moment when it's like, Dennis introduces him to like weed, and then weed turns to coke, and then coke turns to heroin. And that whole sort of montage there, and sending him down this path. So, with that said, talking about Ronnie's nature and talking about Paul Blart, this is where they come together and I feel like have a similar problem, which is struggling to be a comedy. So let's stay on Observer Report, then we'll come back to Paul Blart and we'll do it kind of full circle. So Observer Report's problem is it is leaning so much into this. It is a wonder of how much they want the laughs to remain. Because here's the thing about Observe and Report, is that I can acknowledge, I even just said that Anna Faris like takes it to a whole other level, and makes everything hilarious for her character. And then there's this, where I say, I can acknowledge, oh, that's funny because of this. Like, oh, it's funny because it's just a mall cop movie, but it's, like, got a super dark side to it, and Ronnie has these really weird thoughts, and there's clearly something wrong with him, but it's still a comedy and all that. Observe and Report is not really a movie I laugh out loud at. Like, I acknowledge these things. Like, that's funny because of this, that works as a comedic bit because of this. But I don't laugh out loud at it. I can't think of... I think, Leota's line of, congratulations, Ronnie, you caught a pervert. That gets the biggest laugh out of me in the movie. And it's the very end. It's one of the last lines of the movie, pretty much. But I don't... because I wonder, and I risk sounding insane asking this question, maybe. Am I insane to think that Observe and Report, despite everything that I just said, might not be dark enough? Is that weird? Is that... am I asking too much? Because I feel like it's real... While there are things in there that feel dark, like obviously Dennis transitioning to heroin is meant to be seen as a super dark joke that's taking that joke as far as they can take it and stuff like that. And the scene where he takes Brandy home has been very controversial through the years, to say the least. And then there's the fact that he shoots the flasher. With a real gun, with a real bullet, he shoots the flasher at the end. But here's the thing, is that I'm not saying a rape joke would be funny, but you can tell they're trying to push it as far as they possibly can. But there is and what I'm saying is, while the joke is very dark, and I would never say otherwise, it does feel like its reputation makes the joke seem darker than it is. Because the reputation lets on that he straight up rapes her while she's completely and totally out and unconscious with no awareness whatsoever that this is going on. And while even though she is very drunk and very hazy and on the verge of unconsciousness, she does make it clear that she's aware this is going on and wants it to, and she demands that it continue. Now there is a fine line here because she's drunk and he's not. That's a whole other debate that somebody else can go into. But it does feel like they feel like they're going farther than they are, but they're not. They're just holding back just a tiny, tiny bit so they don't go that far. Despite the fact that the reputation leads you to believe that they did. Because another thing that comes to mind is, think about how much this is supposed to be like Taxi Driver. They even do the thing where he's doing the narrating and then he starts his own narration over, which is pulled right out, a clear, direct reference. So it's clear it's doing the Taxi Driver thing, and that we're leading to this moment, the big moment of Taxi Driver being when he kills all the people at the brothel. And it's really graphic. It's this massive payoff to everything that we've seen, and it's him reaching the peak of his nature. That's been mostly inner, but slowly coming out throughout this. Now, they joke in the middle, the Danny McBride scene with the drug dealers, where he beats them up. And now, when he gets to the police station, he takes the kid to Harrison, he says, there's some dead drug dealers that'll say otherwise, or something like that. And it's like, it's never once hinted at that these drug dealers would have died from when Ronnie was beating them. And I never took it as that they were actually dead. I feel like Ronnie feels like he killed them in his mind, but we know where Ronnie's mind is and how delusional he is. So, despite their broken bones, they're probably fine. So, that's something they could have taken to another level. He could have actually, on screen, killed the drug dealers. And honestly, I really felt from the very start, from April 10th, 2009 to this very day, I've always felt blueballed by this movie in one specific way, where this movie could have gone all the way in. Honestly, I feel like the movie set up something great with how they approached how he stops the Flasher. But I mean, would this movie have not just reached a perfect dark peak if he killed the Flasher? I honestly, like, I always felt like the movie did not have the payoff it was going for, and the payoff that it was obviously seemed to be building up. That he would just straight up kill the Flasher. Because the whole thing is that it's a very mundane task. Like, the whole thing is like, well, it's a threat, certainly in specific ways. It's not, it does not warrant shoot on sight, which is what Ronnie does. But I mean, it feels like the major punchline was supposed to be he kills the Flasher. And then we see the consequences of that. And that's the thing. They could have gone full Taxi Driver. They could have still turned it into him being a hero in this really weird and twisted way. Like, they could have come up with some kind of joke that got us there, whatever that may be. They were writing it, I wasn't, so I'll leave it to them. But yeah, or see Ronnie have consequences and make that the final joke, the final payoff. It's the movie just feels like it just kind of ends and doesn't really reach a satisfying payoff. The only big payoff is Harrison summing up in one line how absurd this whole thing was. And it's like, how much more would you have highlighted that absurdity by having Ronnie literally kill the guy? I don't know. So that's the thing, is like, as far as it being a comedy, is if it's gonna go all in, I almost kind of want, like, to, you can still have the darkness of the comedy. The darkness of the comedy would have been there, if you'd still gone on, because it would have been such overkill. Because the joke is already that it's overkill that he shot him in the shoulder. But if you're gonna say, oh, the joke is overkill, literally do it. Literally go overkill. Yeah, there are moments of this where I feel like it's actually doesn't go the distance that its reputation seems to let on that it does. And honestly, that's kind of frustrating. Or maybe I'm just fucked up. I don't know. But, let's go over now to why I feel like, Paul Blart has a similar problem with it's sort of trying to be something outside of a comedy. Where it's trying to be a badass action movie. But here's the thing, is that I can't really tell, because once it gets to a point to where Paul Blart has this sort of character turnaround where now he's this badass in quotes, action hero, it gets to a point where I genuinely can't tell anymore if it's supposed to be funny or cool, in quotes. Because the characters keep calling him a badass, and he walks in slow-mo to rock music a lot. Like, he has a rock star entrance, as he's going into the climax. And here's the thing that I don't get, is it supposed to be that Paul Blart is now badass and an action hero, or is it supposed to be funny because Kevin James is incapable of looking or being badass? Or are we just supposed to genuinely think he is badass now? The reason I don't think this works is because I feel like it's more, we're supposed to think he genuinely is now. He does, because he has moments earlier where he's trying to do badass things and fails, like when he does the slide thing. He's trying to get behind the pillar there and he can't. He'd still, and there is a funny moment during the climax. The hot sauce bit is funny, where he's like, I'm gonna blind Cara Donnell with hot sauce. And they've built up the hot sauce throughout the movie to get to this point. So you think in your mind, oh, this is an actual payoff. This is gonna be what stops him. And then it does. The burning stops, and Paul says, oh, I didn't have a plan after this. And then they get taken. That's very funny, honestly. So, with those things still in there, I genuinely have no idea how we're supposed to take Paul. As is he still bumbling, and that's the joke that he's trying to be badass, or does the movie actually trying to portray him as a badass? And like I said, when you have the actual characters saying it to the audience blatantly that they think that, that gives me the clue that the audience is supposed to feel that way also. And they play it up way too much with the slow mo and the shit like that. So that's where it loses. It's lost me long before this, but that's the part where it's like I have trouble even figuring out if it's supposed to be that comedic when it's doing certain things now, because I honestly can't tell. So that's how both of these kind of struggle to be comedies in their own way. Where it's like Observe and Report feels like it could be more, and Paul Blart seems like it's just kind of confused at whether it wants to be a real action movie or this stupid kids movie, or a kids movie with a lot of stalker jokes in it and fetish jokes in it. I don't know. It's a mystery. So I think it's been pretty clear. If you're gonna ask, like, which of these do you prefer? Obviously, Observe and Report. And Paul Blart is actually a movie I've seen a few times for reasons that I don't remember. It might have been one of those cases where we still had, like, you know, cable and stuff like that in the 2010 area, and it was like this sort of, well, nothing else is on, so I'll just leave this on in the background kind of thing, because it's not, like, torture. So, or if I need some, or if, like, you know, it's been a bad time or something, it's like, I just need something that's completely and totally mindless, that's, you know, and there's nothing else there. So, yeah, I've seen Paul Blart for a few times now, and the same thing with Observe and Report. But the weird thing also about Observe and Report, as far as coming back to it, is it's also a movie I don't go back to very often because I don't think it's laugh out loud funny, and it's very unpleasant, but also irritatingly not unpleasant enough. It's really weird. I don't know. So this is the best I could do with these two. So if you happen to have wanted this video for a while, here it is. So yeah, we can finally put this in the past. So, like I said, it is September, so there's going to be a lot of these for the next 2 months. In September and October, we're both going to have like 7 days of remake versus, where it's an original versus a remake. So we'll have that to look forward to. I tried to make those as sort of eclectic as possible, so it'll be a bunch of different stuff. And then we'll continue. And there's something else that's going to be going on parallel with the 7 days of remakes for this month, September. So that'll be happening as well. So, yeah, so until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.